I stood frozen, my wedding dress torn at the hem, my veil barely hanging on. The sound of gasps and murmurs filled the grand ballroom as police officers stormed in, pushing through the stunned guests. My groom, my husband of exactly 30 minutes, stood rigid beside me, his face drained of color. "This can't be happening," I whisper, my breath shallow. The lead officer, a stern-looking man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Mason Carter, you are under arrest for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The room erupted into chaos. My mother shrieked. My bridesmaids clutched their bouquets in shock. My boss, yes, my boss, who had attended this wedding like a proud father, shot me a look that sent chills down my spine. I turned to Mason, searching his face for answers, for anything that could make this nightmare make sense. But he didn't look at me. He was staring at the ground, his hands trembling as the officers locked the cuffs around his wrists. This was my wedding day. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life. Instead, I was standing in front of my coworkers, my family, and the man I had just married, watching my entire life collapse around me. How did I get here? 1 year earlier. It started innocently. A few stolen glances across the office. A casual joke in the break room. An after-hours work session that stretched too long, turning into dinner at a quiet little restaurant. Mason was charming, ambitious, and had a confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He was the star employee in our company, always closing deals, always making the right moves. And me? I was just trying to climb the corporate ladder, doing my best to make a name for myself. But Mason made it easy to believe in something more. "We're the dream team," he'd say, flashing that perfect, dimpled grin. "Work together. Win together." It wasn't long before working together turned into stolen kisses in the supply closet and late-night whispers on company trips. We thought we were being discreet. We thought no one knew. We were wrong. The office was a shark tank, and our relationship was fresh blood in the water. The whispers started small, barely noticeable. But soon, it was impossible to ignore. "She's only getting that promotion because of him. If this ends badly, one of them is getting fired." And then there was Monica. Monica was my mentor, the woman who had taken me under her wing and taught me everything I knew. She pulled me aside one day, her expression unreadable. "You're playing with fire, sweetheart," she warned. "Office relationships don't end well. And Mason? He's not who you think he is." I laughed it off. Monica was just being protective. She'd seen too many office flings crash and burn, and she didn't want me to be collateral damage. But Mason? He was different. We were different, or so I thought. The first red flag was subtle. An unusual charge on Mason's company card, brushed off as a business expense. Then came the locked drawers at his desk, the hushed phone calls, the nervous glances when certain people walked by. I told myself it was nothing, until it wasn't. One night, I woke up to find him missing from our bed. I followed the faint glow of his laptop screen into the living room. Mason was hunched over, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Numbers, spreadsheets, bank accounts. He didn't hear me approach. "Mason," he flinched, slammed the laptop shut, forced a smile. "Hey, babe." Couldn't sleep, but his eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. Fear. And that's when I knew something was very wrong. The week before the wedding, the office was buzzing with rumors. "Something's going down," Monica muttered under her breath. I don't know what, but Mason's in deep. I confronted him that night. "Mason, tell me the truth. What's going on?" He hesitated. Then he did something that sent a chill through my spine. He laughed, like I had just asked him if the sky was blue, like I was the fool for even questioning him. "You worry too much, babe," he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "After the wedding, none of this will matter." And like a fool, I believed him, until I stood there in my wedding dress, watching the man I had just vowed to love and cherish being dragged away in handcuffs. My career? Ruined. My reputation? Destroyed. And my heart? Shattered. As the police escorted Mason out, my boss stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He leaned in, his voice low but firm. "You need to come to the office first thing Monday morning." I swallowed hard. Why? His next words made my blood run cold. "Because you might be under investigation, too." Monday morning came too soon. I barely slept, haunted by the image of Mason being dragged away in cuffs. My wedding dress still lay crumpled in the corner of my bedroom, a cruel reminder of how fast everything had fallen apart. I arrived at the office just before 8 a.m., my stomach twisting into knots. The usually buzzing floor was eerily quiet. Eyes followed me as I walked through the glass doors, some filled with pity, others with judgment. When I reached the executive wing, Monica was already waiting. Her sharp eyes softened, just for a second, before she gestured toward the conference room. "They're waiting for you," she said quietly. I took a deep breath, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped inside. 3 men sat at the long, polished table. My boss, Mr. Grayson, sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Beside him was the company's legal counsel, a balding man who didn't bother hiding his disapproval. And across from them, Detective Jameson, the same officer who had arrested Mason at my wedding. "Have a seat," Mr. Grayson said, his tone far too calm. I obeyed, my hands trembling under the table. "Let's get straight to the point," Jameson began, flipping open a thick file. "How much do you know about your husband's financial dealings?" The word husband felt like a slap. I swallowed hard. I don't know anything. I swear, I didn't even know he was stealing millions from the company," he finished for me, raising an eyebrow. "Millions?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I shook my head, panic rising in my throat. I had no idea. I thought everything was fine. Jameson leaned forward. "We have evidence that suggests otherwise. Shared accounts. Transfers linked directly to you. Care to explain that?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? No, I didn't touch any accounts. Mason handled all of our finances." But the suspicion in the room was palpable. "We need full transparency," Mr. Grayson said, his voice like ice. "Every conversation you've had with Mason, every document you've touched. If you knew anything and didn't report it, you're just as guilty." Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I forced them down. "I'm telling you, I didn't know. I loved him. I trusted him." My voice cracked. "And now, I don't even know who I married." Jameson's gaze didn't waver. "If we find out you were involved, Mrs. Carter, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose everything." I couldn't breathe. My dream career, my future, my freedom, it was all hanging by a thread. And Mason? He had shattered every piece of trust one had left. I stumbled out of the conference room, my head spinning. Monica was waiting for me. "What did they say?" she asked, her usual no-nonsense tone gentler than usual. I could barely find my voice. They think I knew." Her face darkened. "Did you?" "No," I snapped, my voice shaking. "I didn't know a thing. But now, I don't even know if I can believe anything he ever told me." Monica sighed and pulled me into her office, shutting the door behind us. "Listen to me carefully. If there's anything that could connect you to what Mason did, you need to tell me now. If you go down, I can't save you." I thought about the nights he worked late, the locked drawers, the hidden laptop screen. How many signs had I ignored because I wanted to believe in us? "I need to see his files," I whispered, a pit forming in my stomach. Monica's brow furrowed. "His office is sealed off. Corporate security took everything." But I remembered something Mason never thought to hide. His home office. That night, I returned to the apartment we had once shared. The wedding decorations were still there, taunting me. I ripped the "Just Married" banner off the wall and tossed it aside. His home office door was locked, but I knew where Mason kept the spare key. The second I stepped inside, the familiar smell of his cologne lingered. The desk was immaculate, too perfect. I started opening drawers, flipping through files. Bills, client contracts, nothing out of the ordinary, until I found the black leather notebook tucked behind the bookshelf. My heart pounded as I opened it. At first glance, it seemed harmless: dates, client names, project notes. But then I turned the page and saw it. A list of transfers, money moved under fake accounts. And right next to them, my name. My blood ran cold. Mason had been using my identity to cover his tracks. My hands shook as I flipped further until I reached the last entry. A meeting scheduled 3 days before our wedding. Initials, CH amount, $500,000. I didn't know anyone with those initials. But whoever they were, Mason had paid them a lot of money to stay quiet. And now, that silence was about to shatter my life. I was about to close the notebook when I heard the front door creak open. My breath caught. Mason was supposed to be in custody. So who? A shadow crossed the doorway. Did you really think you'd find all the answers that easily? The voice sent an icy chill down my spine. I wasn't alone. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The voice was low, familiar, but not Mason's. I turned slowly, my hands tightening around the black leather notebook. And there he was, Chris Harding, Mason's closest friend and work buddy. I always thought Chris was harmless, the quiet, easygoing guy who brought donuts to meetings. But standing there in the dim light, with his tall frame blocking the doorway, he looked anything but harmless. You shouldn't be here, Ava. His tone was cold. Too cold. I swallowed the fear rising in my throat. What are you doing here, Chris? He stepped closer, his eyes landing on the notebook in my hands. I could ask you the same thing. What did you find? I clutched the notebook tighter. I should be asking you. What is this? What's your connection to Mason's, to everything he did? For a moment, Chris didn't answer. Then he gave a slow, humorless laugh. You really think Mason did all this alone? My blood ran cold. What do you mean? I stammered. Chris tilted his head, his lips curling into a smirk. He was good at hiding things, but he wasn't a mastermind. He wasn't smart enough for that. I shook my head in disbelief. But you were his best friend. Chris took another step forward, closing the distance between us. That's how he got sloppy. Because he trusted me. My legs felt weak. Why? Why would you do this? Because I was tired of being invisible. He snapped, his voice sharp with bitterness. I was the one doing all the work. Mason just took the credit. Promotions, raises, all those bonuses, they were mine. But no one ever noticed me. I tried to process his words, but my head was spinning. You're the one who planned it, I whispered. Chris smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. Mason was the face. I was the brain. And it worked perfectly until he got stupid and married you. My stomach twisted. Why does this have anything to do with me? Chris's face darkened. Because Mason made a mistake. He used your name to cover his tracks. And now, if anyone digs too deep, I go down with him. I can't let that happen. A chill crept up my spine. My pulse pounded in my ears. You think you can pin everything on me? I challenged, though my voice trembled. Chris leaned in close, too close. If you make noise, Ava, I'll make sure they think you were pulling the strings. Mason already made you look guilty. It won't take much to finish the job. I backed up against the desk, my fingers searching blindly for anything to protect myself. Why are you even here? I demanded, my breath shallow. Chris let out a slow sigh, as if I was wasting his time. Because I need that notebook, and you're going to give it to me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I knew one thing. If I handed over the notebook, I'd lose the only evidence that could clear my name. But if I refused, I didn't want to think about what Chris might do. I met his eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. If you touch me, they'll know. Chris laughed quietly. No one's coming to save you, Ava. Mason's locked up. Your company? They already think you're guilty. You're on your own. My hand finally closed around something cold and heavy, a letter opener. Not much, but better than nothing. I tightened my grip, willing my shaking legs to hold steady. You won't get away with this, I said, lifting my chin. I'll make sure of it. Chris's expression hardened. We'll see about that. Without thinking, I swung the letter opener toward him. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was enough to make him flinch. I didn't wait. I bolted past him, tearing down the hall toward the front door. He was fast, faster than I expected. His footsteps thundered behind me. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, heart hammering. My keys. I needed my car keys. I dug into my bag, fingers trembling as I heard Chris's footsteps getting closer. Don't be stupid, Ava, he shouted. I found the keys and sprinted to my car. My hand shook so badly that I nearly dropped them. Somehow, I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. Chris was already at the curb when I slammed the door shut. I twisted the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't think, I just hit the gas. The tires screeched as I sped away, my chest heaving with panic. In the rearview mirror, Chris stood under the flickering streetlight, watching me. His face was cold, calculating, and I knew this wasn't over. I didn't stop driving until I reached my best friend Lily's apartment across town. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. The second she opened the door, I broke down. Between gasping breaths, I told her everything. Mason's lies, the stolen money, and what Chris had just revealed. Lily's face paled. "Ava, this is serious. You have to go to the police." I shook my head violently. "I can't. Chris will frame me. He knows how to twist the evidence. If I go to the police with nothing but my word, they'll believe him." Lily bit her lip, her mind racing. "Then we need proof, something that ties him to the whole thing." I pulled out the notebook, flipping back to the last entry. CH, $500,000. "This," I whispered, "is our only lead. Whatever this payment was for, it's the key." Lily grabbed her laptop. "If Chris thinks he's smarter than you, he's got another thing coming." As she started digging, I sat back, my heart still pounding. I thought marrying Mason was my biggest mistake. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chris's face, cold, calculating, and completely unafraid. By the time the sun rose, a sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I knew Chris wouldn't stop. He had too much to lose. And now that I had the notebook, I was a problem he needed to make disappear. I wasn't going to let that happen. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her laptop still open. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold it. I sat down next to her and opened the notebook again, flipping to the last entry. CH, $500,000. The initials were obvious, Chris Harding. But the amount, what was it for? And more importantly, who had paid it? I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. Mason. A visit behind bars. By noon, I was sitting across from my husband, if I could still call him that, on the other side of scratched plexiglass window. Mason looked worse than I remembered. His once pristine hair was unkempt, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. But when he saw me, a faint flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Ava," he leaned forward, his voice rough. "You shouldn't be here." I slammed the notebook down on the ledge between us. "Cut the act, Mason. I know everything." His face paled, but he didn't deny it. "Why?" My voice trembled with rage. "Why did you drag me into this? You used my name, my career. You nearly ruined my life." Mason sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you were convenient." The words hit like a slap. Convenient. Like I was a tool, not a wife. "Who paid Chris?" I demanded, cutting through his weak apology. "What was the $500,000 for?" His jaw tightened. "Ava, if you know what's good for you, you'll drop this." I leaned in, my voice ice cold. "I'm already in it, Mason. So, start talking before I walk out of here and leave you to rot alone." For a moment, he hesitated. Then, something inside him cracked. "You think I ran this scam by myself?" he hissed. "I was a cog in the machine. Chris and I, we weren't the only ones." My heart pounded louder. "Who else?" Mason glanced over his shoulder, as if he expected someone to be listening. When he turned back, his face was pale. "There's a bigger player, someone with real power. Chris handled the dirty work, but the orders? They came from higher up." A chill ran down my spine. This was bigger than I'd thought. "Who, Mason?" My voice was barely above a whisper. His eyes locked onto mine. "Our boss." I sucked in a sharp breath. "You mean Mr. Cartwright?" Mason nodded grimly. "He's been laundering company funds for years. Chris and I were just his puppets. That $500,000? It was a payoff to make sure Chris stayed quiet after I got caught." My stomach twisted. The CEO of our company, a man everyone admired, was at the center of it all. And now that I know, I asked, my voice shaking. Mason's expression darkened. "You're a threat, Ava. If Chris doesn't stop you, Cartwright will." My pulse roared in my ears. I stood up, grabbing the notebook with trembling fingers. "You put me in danger," I said, my voice thick with anger and fear. "I trusted you. I loved you." Mason didn't argue. He just looked at me with hollow eyes. "Be careful," he said quietly. "They won't hesitate to destroy you." I turned on my heel and walked away, but my mind spun with questions. If Cartwright was involved, how far would he go to keep his secrets safe? By the time I returned to Lily's apartment, my heart still pounded. She sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and half-drunk coffee cups. "Any luck?" I asked, dropping the notebook on the table. She frowned. I dug into Cartwright's financials, but the guy's airtight. No offshore accounts, no suspicious transfers, nothing. I chewed my lip, frustration burning inside me. He has to be hiding it somewhere. Mason wouldn't lie about this, not when his life's on the line. Lily sighed and leaned back. "Okay, so if Cartwright's the mastermind, how do we prove it?" A knock at the door froze us both. My breath caught in my throat. Lily shot me a worried look. "You expecting anyone?" I shook my head, heart thudding painfully. Slowly, she crept to the peephole. Her face paled. "It's Chris." Fear slammed through me. "Don't open it." "I wasn't planning to," she hissed. Another knock, louder this time. "Ladies," Chris's smooth voice floated through the door. "I know you're in there. Open up, or I'll make this messy." Panic clawed at my chest. "What do we do?" Lily whispered. I scanned the room, mind racing. Then my eyes fell on her back window. "The fire escape," I breathed. Without another word, we bolted for the window. I shoved it open as quietly as I could and slipped out, Lily right behind me. From below, Chris's voice echoed faintly through the alley. "You can't run forever, Ava." I didn't look back. We climbed down to the street and slipped into the shadows, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't just about Mason anymore. I had poked the beast, and now the beast wanted me gone. But I wasn't giving up. Not until I brought them all down. And I knew exactly where to start. Cartwright. The city hummed quietly as Lily and I slipped into a crowded cafe across from Cartwright Industries. My heart pounded with a sharp edge of fear, but beneath it, rage burned hotter. Chris wanted to silence me. Cartwright wanted to bury the truth. But I wasn't about to let them win. Lily pulled out her laptop, fingers flying over the keys. "If Cartwright's hiding something, we need proof, something the authorities can't ignore." I clenched my jaw. Mason said the orders came from higher up. "We need to find a paper trail, if there is one." Lily smirked faintly. "Lucky for us, corporate criminals are always sloppy somewhere." I glanced out the window toward the towering building where I'd once dreamed of a perfect life with Mason. Now, all I wanted was to tear their empire down, and I knew exactly how to do it. An hour later, we were perched on a rooftop across from Cartwright's office. Lily had hacked into the company's secure Wi-Fi, and I watched as folders of confidential files flooded her screen. "I'm in," she whispered, excitement dancing in her voice. My stomach twisted. "Look for any off-the-books transactions. Large sums moving in and out." Minutes stretched into eternity as Lily scoured through the encrypted folders. My hands trembled as the weight of what we were doing settled over me. If we got caught, there was no turning back. "Bingo," she breathed suddenly, dragging a file to her desktop. "A private slush fund. Over $10 million funneled through shell companies. Look at the dates." I leaned closer. Every payment lined up with major company projects, and one hefty $500,000 payout coincided with Mason's arrest. My throat went dry. "This is it," I whispered. "This proves everything." But as I stared at the screen, a terrible realization crept in. If I had this evidence, Chris and Cartwright wouldn't stop until they erased me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd call. "Detective Ramirez," a familiar voice answered. "You again? I have something you're going to want to see," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's about Cartwright Industries, embezzlement, bribes, and a hitman named Chris Harding." The silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. "Where are you?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "I'll come to you. Just promise me you'll protect me when I do." Ramirez's tone softened. "I've got your back, but you need to hurry. If Cartwright's onto you, you're not safe." I hung up and turned to Lily. "Send everything to Ramirez. Make sure there are backups everywhere." She nodded and hit send. But before I could exhale, a low vibration buzzed through my phone. Unknown caller. I froze. My blood turned cold. "Chris." I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Running isn't a good look on you, Ava." His voice dripped with mockery. "You're playing a dangerous game." I'd stop. while you still can. My hand shook, but I forced my voice to stay even. You're scared, Chris. And you should be. I have everything I need to bury you. A cold chuckle. Bold. But you forget who you're up against. He hung up, and for a moment the world tilted. I wasn't just fighting Mason's lies anymore. I was in the crosshairs of a man willing to kill to keep his secrets. By nightfall, Lily and I met Ramirez in a dimly lit parking garage. My pulse raced as I handed him the flash drive. This is everything, I said. The slush fund. The payments. Cartwright's orders to cover up Mason's mess. Ramirez's face hardened as he pocketed the evidence. This is enough to take them both down, but you need to lay low. If Cartwright suspects. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I know, I said quietly. But just as I turned to leave, a black car skidded into the garage. My breath hitched. Chris. He stepped out, calm and lethal, his cold gaze locking on me. You really don't know when to quit, do you? His voice echoed through the garage. Ramirez reached for his gun, but Chris was faster, pulling a sleek, silver pistol from his jacket. Hand over the drive, he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Or I end this. Right now. Fear gripped me. If I gave him the evidence, everything Mason did would be buried. But if I didn't, Ramirez took a step forward. Put the gun down, Harding. You're already finished. Chris smiled. No, detective. I'm just getting started. In a heartbeat, chaos exploded. A gunshot ripped through the air. I screamed as Ramirez tackled me to the ground. Lily scrambled behind a pillar while Chris fired again, his bullets echoing through the concrete maze. I felt the heat of blood. Ramirez had been hit. Run, he gasped, clutching his side. But I couldn't leave. Not now. With trembling hands, I grabbed his fallen gun and rose to my feet. Chris stalked closer, his cold eyes locked on me. This ends now, Ava, he murmured. My hand shook as I aimed the gun at him. I'm done being scared of you. For the first time, I saw it, doubt flickering behind his mask of control. You won't shoot, he sneered. I pulled the trigger. A sharp crack filled the air. Chris stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the ground. Ramirez groaned behind me, but his voice was strong. Backup's coming. He's done. I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to believe it was over. But as the distant wail of sirens grew closer, I knew one thing for certain. Cartwright wouldn't stop, and I wasn't safe. Not yet. Hours later, in the sterile hum of the hospital, Ramirez assured me Chris was in custody, and Mason's cooperation had sealed Cartwright's fate. You did it, Lily said softly, squeezing my hand. You took them down. But as I stared out the window into the night, a cold truth settled deep in my chest. I had survived Chris. I had exposed the truth. But I knew Cartwright's empire ran deeper than I ever imagined. And if he still wanted me gone, I wasn't safe. Not now. Not ever. And I wasn't about to stop watching my back. Ever dated a coworker? Share your wildest workplace romance story in the comments below. And don't miss our next video on why you must never trust your boss. Click here to watch now.